To my left, we have our guest panelists. To the far left, I take my word for it. This was not intended. Just already named. But we have Peter Schorsh. He is the editor of St. Peter's blog. Thank you. We have Dr. David McKalip, who is the editor of the Sunbeam Times. And now on to our candidates. As some of you may have seen in the media, Representative Peters will not be joining us here this evening. While she was one of the first to confirm and was confirmed up until this evening, I did receive email from her campaign this afternoon stating that there was a scheduling conflict and therefore she would not be with us. We have the gentleman here to my right. I will go to first is David Jolly, attorney and a former aide to Congressman Bill Young. Thank you. And closest to me is retired Brigadier General Mark Bircher. And now to our program. And the rules of our forum here are as follows. It's pretty simple, straightforward. The candidates will begin by giving an opening remark and statement of 3 minutes each. We will then go on to the question and answer phase. The questions will be coming primarily from our guest panelists, and towards the end, I will ask some questions that were submitted from our members. The candidates have each 3 minutes to answer a question. When 30 minutes are remaining, I will hold up my thing here and wave it up. And I'll be sitting right there. And 30 seconds remain. I will wave this around. And when time is up, I will just cut you off. But without further ado, I'm going to move this podium back, and we're going to go into the opening statements. We'll start alphabetically. So General Bircher, you'll be first.
And can everyone hear me okay in the back? Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the Young Republicans for putting on this debate forum. I'd like to thank Mr. Jolly. He's gone out of his way to be cordial to my wife and me during this campaign, my wife Jackie and my son Bill, and I really appreciate that. And I got to meet his parents, and since you'd probably get all the blame, you have to take some of the credit for that. I'd also like to thank everybody in this room, because your presence is a testament to your citizenship and your dedication to making our community be the best it can, and I greatly appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm applying for a job tonight. I want to be your representative to Congress, so what you do when you're looking at a prospective employer, you give them why you think you're qualified. I was 33 years in the Marine Corps. I commanded had the privilege of commanding 2 squadrons, a 5,000 sailor and Marine Air Wing. I was number 2 in command of the world's largest fighting organization, the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, if anyone's ever been in it. That really gave me a lot of experience. I've been 25 years in industry as an airline pilot, and I'm a lawyer. So what's the common theme and why I think I'm qualified for this job? Each of those occupations has one word that stands out among the most, and that's the sense of service. The higher you go in the military, the more you serve, and in the Marine Corps, the case of sailors and the Marines. In industry, as an airline pilot, I serve my customer, and naturally as a lawyer, same with Mr. Jolly, you serve the interests of your client. I think my lifetime, boy to man, has been a sense of service. That's why I want to continue on that service as your representative to Congress. Let me talk about another form of service. That's the federal government service. Now let's remember, this is important in my platform. The states created this entity known as the federal government. It's supposed to serve the interests of the states. And in my view, and the reason I'm here, there's been a staggering role reversal that entity we created for the sole purpose to serve us is into our lives, our liberty, and our money in an unsustainable way. I'd like to reverse that trend. What I see is bureaucracy, inefficiency, compliance, regulation, debt, and deficit. I don't think it has to be that way. For example, the founders had 4 departments. we now have 15 cabinet-level departments and 6 other equivalent agencies. It's gone well past the sense of the state, the defense, the treasury, the justice. That's all the founders thought. On top of that, 463, if you go to USA.gov, 463 agencies and organizations. I think we can do better. My service to our community, twice I've been recalled for 2.5 years to active duty. When I retired from the Marine Corps, I spent the first half of 2010 volunteering in the Public Defender's Office. I'm a rabid baseball fan, so I've been participating in Little League. I continue pro bono work as an attorney. In the end, it's this. I want to go to Congress. If you think you know how to spend your money better than the decree of an imperial person in Washington, if you think you know how to take care of yourself and your family better than Washington does, if you think your federal government should serve you and you shouldn't be serving your federal government, my name's Mark Bircher. I'm running for Congress.
I would like to say the same thing about the General and his family as well. It has been a pleasure to get to know Mark in this race. I have utmost respect for him. And let me tell you something, folks. Tonight is a good night for the Pinellas County Republican Party. Tonight is a good night for Pinellas County, and here's why. We know how to run a primary. Yes. And we run it from the grassroots up. We run this primary with good candidates. Mark Bircher is a good candidate. If on January 15th I wake up and he's our nominee, I look forward to supporting you and making sure that you beat Alex Sink. That said, while this is a good night for Pinellas County, I can tell you there is no better way to spoil a good New Year's than to have to answer questions from Dr. David McKalip and Peter Schorsh. I would like to wish a happy early birthday to Peter. Hopefully he'll grant me a little bit of currency up here. I understand your birthday's tomorrow. Happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
Another very special birthday this evening. My mother here in the front row today is her birthday. So folks, we do know how to run a primary. We are running a primary because the issues in this race are extremely important. On January 15th, we are going to have a nominee that must beat Alex Sink. And we're going to talk about it. We must beat Alex Sink, not because she's from Polk County and we're from Pinellas County, but because the National Democratic Party that asked her to move here and run is wrong on the issues, and we know that. That is why we must make sure that we honor the legacy of our late Congressman Bill Young, and we hold this seat for the Republican Party, and we protect the majority of this. When I was old enough to register to vote, I registered as a Republican because I believe in the core economic principles of the Republican Party. Some would say we have lost our way, and I would agree with that in a lot of respects. We have. We know that we can do a better job when it comes to the debt and to the deficit. We know that when this president took office, our national debt stood at nearly $10 trillion. The cumulative debt of 220 years of our republic sat at $10 trillion. When this president leaves office, that number will be roughly $20 trillion. In 8 years, his administration will have doubled what took 220 years to accumulate. Republicans, in part, should bear some responsibility for that. There has not been enough conviction within the halls of Congress to stand up to this president on that. We need to elect somebody that will do that. We're going to have an opportunity tonight to talk about a lot of issues, and I'm glad that we have this forum. The voters in this county, the voters in this primary, deserve to hear where we stand on the issues. I know there's going to be many areas in which we agree, and tonight you're going to hear a lot of that. But from here until Election Day, for all three candidates, including Kathleen, who I understand can't be here tonight, the voters need to know where each of the three of us stand on the issues, because on Election Day, that's what matters, where we stand on the issues. I look forward to tonight. Peter, David. David, we don't have a fang and claw to give you. You probably won 10 of them at Tiger Bay, but I imagine you'll get a couple tonight if you do your good work. So thank you, everybody, for letting us be here this evening.
All right. I believe I'm
first up, and I want to say thank you to the Pinellas County Young Republicans. They've really done an amazing job here. Look at the crowd they produced. Good job. It's an honor to be here and a privilege to sit up here. Thank you to the candidates for showing up. And I want to encourage you tonight to try to answer the questions. Your talking points are important, but direct answers to questions are always appreciated in races like this. And since your opponent's not here, if you have a clear understanding of your opponent's position and you're able to differentiate yourself from each other and the person who's not here, please indicate how you differ from your opponent. So the first question goes to Mr. Bircher, who advised me earlier. He goes by Mark now, not General. Mr. Bircher, the Federal Reserve is a private banking corporation that has substantial influence over the behavior of our government and our nation. Many say it's printing too much money, it's not transparent, and not meeting its original mandates. Can you describe if there should be any changes made relating to the current function or existence of the Federal Reserve?
Yeah, the Federal Reserve, as you alluded, it's not federal, has no reserves, and it's not a bank. That should frame how I feel about it. Third National Bank of the United States, has been two before it. There's a lot of history on central banks. Andrew Jackson's dying words, with your greatest accomplishment, I killed the bank. I am concerned that one unelected, almost unaccountable person has that much power in a republic with our central banks. The founder of the notion of central banks stated, "Let me control a nation's money. I care not who makes the law." If that doesn't tell us that we need to at least guard, I don't know what else could, because in many cases, if you've ever been around teenagers, a plan without money is a hope. So money is the foundation almost to everything. I'm not as strident as some. Within the enumerated powers, I might be open to the transition of the Reserve Bank. When the Reserve Bank is used in the way that we're seeing it, and actually Mr. Jolly explained it in the numbers, I don't think we can go much further on this path with the relationship with the central bank. If that means getting rid of it, I would support it.
My position on the Fed, first and foremost, considering what is in the realm of the Article 1 authority of the Congress, would be to audit the Fed. I think we can all agree that an audit is appropriate. I understand, given the current statute, I believe there are 3 or 4 exemptions from some of the current audit provisions, but I would support the current legislation in place to audit the Fed. I think you also have to look at some of the organic authorities of the Fed, from stabilizing prices to maintaining long-term interest rates. There are certain things that only an independent Fed can do. I think it's good, frankly, that the Fed sits just outside the reach of the President and the Congress directly. I think there's sufficient oversight authority in place. The issue of whether or not the Fed should bear any responsibility for employment is something that should be looked at. I know there's some legislation on the Hill as well about that. But I would say primarily, let's start with what is currently attainable. Let's push the audit the Fed measure. Let's get that enacted. And from there, transparency and sunlight will dictate where we go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you also to the Pinellas County Young Republicans, a lot of my friends in the audience. Thank you to all the Republicans. I am a registered Republican, just for the record. And I am
just like getting our mail pieces.
I want to take this chance also to publicly thank David McKalip for sitting within 3 feet of me. We don't often agree on everything, but like you all, it's great that you all are here in a torrential downpour. And so kudos to you for turning out tonight. My questions will probably be a little bit more political than they will be policy oriented. And so I'd like to ask both of you, if you are elected, you'll obviously be a member of the Republican caucus. Would you support the so-called Hassard Rule that requires a majority of the majority to move legislation forward for a floor vote? Or do you believe that bills that have already passed the Senate should receive a floor vote in the House of Representatives if there is a clear bipartisan majority in support of them? Please, General. Or I think we should rotate, right? And David, you go first, and then General? Yeah.
So I would say in principle, yes. But let's talk about what that really means, because the reason the Hassard Rule comes up. It's kind of like when you hear about reconciliation every couple of years. You hear about reconciliation because the process is broken down. You hear about the Hassler Rule usually when the process is broken down. I think if we restore order to the institution itself and we go back to a traditional committee structure. Look, what has happened in the past 10 years, and we've seen this under both Democrat and Republican majorities, the leadership controls everything. You would often hear the late Congressman Young, when he would talk about his frustration having been in office for 43 years, it felt like times there was very little he could do because the leadership controlled everything. It's an environment like that when we hear about the Hassler Rule, because the leadership is invoking the Hassler Rule. The Hassler Rule is an interesting thing, right? And this goes almost to an academic conversation about what's the role of a representative. Is the role of a representative to put their convictions in front of the voters and have the voters choose, and then they honor those convictions on every vote? Or is the role of a representative to put themselves in front of the voters and then for each and every vote think, what would the voters collectively in my district expect me to do? What would be the most representative? That's an academic question that really has no final answer, but it speaks to this question, because is the role of the majority to further the policies that they ran on and that they were elected for nationally? Or is it okay to break the Hassler Rule? And I would say, generally speaking, I fall in line with the Hassler Rule. I think it's a good thing. But there have to be exceptions. Within the whip's office, within the Congress, you have leadership on both sides who are always counting where do our own members stand on a certain issue. Are they going to vote yes or no? And then that helps them determine the floor schedule. Do they have the votes for legislation? Occasionally, the whip's office on either side will come out with a message that says this is a vote of conscience. In other words, we're not going to waive. They don't say it, but they're waiving the Hassler Rule. And it's appropriate at times to waive the Hassler Rule. The Terry Shigo vote, which was a personal vote here in Pinellas County, though I don't think the Congress had jurisdiction to consider it. At the end of the day, that was a vote of conviction, and the Hassler Rule would not have been invoked in that situation. Similarly, all of the repeal votes on Obamacare, and I would have supported absolutely every single one of those repeal votes. At the end of the day, though, and I've said this publicly, at the end of the day, the job of a legislator is to legislate. And if we didn't have the votes, the last vote in the fiscal year prior to the government shutting down, I think you have to waive the Hassler Rule and say we have to keep the government open. The answer to the question is, generally speaking, yes, I support the Hassler Rule. I think it's a good principle. There have to be times, though, like any rule, where you have to make exceptions to it. Otherwise, it's a doctrine that we should subscribe to.
Sir, I think my answer for the Hassler Rule, first, it's not a rule. It's discretionary. So the idea that we are letting our employees waste our time, in my view, talking about what their procedures. We should be giving them a report card on what they get done, not how they get it done. So in my view, each speaker is well on record. Sometimes they use it, sometimes they don't. So since it's not really a rule, I don't think it's real productive for us down here, other than to get rid of people that aren't getting the job done. That's how I see the Hassler Rule is almost irrelevant.
You done with that?
Yes, sir.
Trying to give you your time.
Am I done? Help me out here.
All right. So the way this is scheduled, I'll always be asking you first, Mark. So I want to ask you about military action. Congress is supposed to have the constitutional authority to declare war. It hasn't done so since World War II, despite numerous military actions. Tell me what you think the proper role of Congress is in declaring a military action against an adversary. And do you think the recent attack on Libya by the U.S. government was constitutional and wise? And further, if in Congress, Syria was our enemy and subject to attack, would you insist on a congressional declaration of war?
I really like this question, Doctor, because I think it goes to the heart of what arguably is the most important feature of our central government is common defense. And if we followed our budget tells a lot about money. For the first 100 and some years, the pie was almost all DOD, and there's this tiny sliver of everything else. So let's talk what's important here. 5 times in this country's history we've gone through. Now let's remember, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 is as clear as English can be written. Powers of Congress declare war. The framers didn't want a king. So these idea of war resolution, War Powers Act, that take the enumerated power of the of the Congress and transfer it to the executive is an impermissible expansion of executive power that threatens the liberty of the people of the United States. I'm a pragmatic military man, and I need to be careful here, because as we speak, there are young men and women in harm's way right now, betting all their tomorrows on this. Many in this room have done that. So we can't really go into the policy now because troops are in the field. That moots any of this type of conversation. But for policy, it's a great question. We have not won a major war since we stopped declaring them. That is not to diminish the heroism of the many thousands, hundreds of thousands actually, in our wars that have given everything for this. I believe war should be declared because the framers said that only the people pay in blood and treasure when we go to war. So only the people properly get to decide. And what have we done since then? I ask you to look at the first day of the war powers in the Korean War and the Vietnam War. I was on the first day of the invasion of Iraq. We were talking 3 weeks. I was recalled 3 years later to the continuation of this war. So is it proper at the Chosin Reservoir or Kodo Reed or Port Chop Hill to ask the American people if they want to fight a war? That's a real bad time to determine the commitment. There's people in this room that have been at Khe Sanh and all the other the hill battles on Highway 9 out to in the First Corps, down in the Fourth Corps. This is a real bad time to ask the American people what their commitment is to sacrifice when troops are in contact. I could say Ramadi, Fallujah. I could go through the whole thing. I hope I'm making my point here.
Please address Libya and Syria.
Okay, Libya. First, whenever we send troops without the proper authorization, the first thing that goes is the troop. I can't answer Libya until I can get my government to tell me what happened. I don't know what happened because there's this tremendous reticence. My opinion is when we took down what rule of law was in Libya and then we send in a 4-man detachment to protect an ambassador, that's the policy that I'm going to
Talking about the cruise missiles flying in without a declaration of war.
That's what I'm talking about. They've already, since that went in.
Time.
Okay, sorry.
All right, Mr. Jolly.
So now I have to answer a question from David McKalip about foreign policy sitting next to a general. Listen.
There's also brain search in that, so he's a
That's
pretty
right.
smart guy.
That's right. So let's talk about Libya, let's talk about Syria, and then let's talk about war powers resolution, enumerated powers, and so forth. The extraction recently in Libya of the 4 high-value targets, I think, was necessary to do and was done with coordination with the Libyan government, and that was appropriate. Our intervention in their civil war, I think, was inappropriate in 2011. I don't think there was a mission for us intervening in their civil war. In Syria, I think the President of the United States significantly diminished the respect that he holds on the national security world stage as a result of setting a bright line and then ignoring it. I'm not in favor of intervening just to intervene. But there are situations where only the President of the United States as Commander-in-Chief has the immediate ability to do so. If the Congress had the flexibility and the immediate ability to respond when necessary, we would have seen that, but we haven't seen that. I think the War Powers Resolution was an outgrowth of the Necessary and Proper Clause of Article 1, Section 8 that the General referred to. I think it rests within Article 1, the authority to declare war, rests with the Congress. I think the Congress decided in 72 and 73 in limiting the President's authority, it also acknowledged that the President did have certain authorities that only the President could execute. During the Balkan conflicts, we wrestled with this a lot. I had the opportunity to be on Mr. Young's staff for, in one way or another for nearly 20 years. And during the 90s, President Clinton and his engagement in the Balkans was very similar to some of the issues we see in Libya and Syria. We wrestled with the War Powers Act for months. And was it appropriate to have some form of rewrite of the War Powers Act? We know what the President did with President Clinton at the time. And frankly, the Congress, on both the Republican side and Democratic side, was offended with the way President Clinton handled his activities in the Balkans. I don't believe we should be the world's policeman. I do believe in certain situations through an international effort where it takes military power to intervene in a humanitarian crisis that is resulting in chemical weapon attacks on 400 children like we saw in Syria, and the President said, if you do this, we're going to make you pay the cost. Then we have to make the government pay the cost. and he didn't do that. If that answers your question, I'll stay with that, but I would say, listen, I understand and respect the Article I authority of the Congress to declare war. There's also a time and a place where only the President of the United States can offer an immediate response as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Services.
How are we on time?
15 seconds left.
So you said international action is appropriate, Americans working within international action to go into Syria. Is that correct?
I think a response was needed immediately in Syria.
Without a
I think
congressional declaration of war?
there was absolutely no time for a congressional declaration.
Because we have, I think we have 8 video cameras, I'm going to ask a follow-up, 30-second follow-up to the general, just because I want to be very clear about this. You made the statement, we have not won a war since we stopped declaring them. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to clarify that based on the first Gulf War. If you believe that that was a victory, or if that was in your words, we did not win that war.
My statement, and I have to play it back, is that we have not won a major war.
Okay.
When I read General Norman Schwarzkopf, it doesn't take a hero. He makes the point in there, 134 combat deaths, although a tragedy to all of those, less than 234 deaths. He makes the point to draw a conclusion out of that may be dangerous for the future. I think it was dangerous because the next time we went back, we went with a force 1/5 the size.
Very good. Thank you.
So that's
Thank you.
my answer.
One of the greatest attributes of the late Congressman Young was his understanding of the needs of the community, and he was probably most effective at bringing home funding from Washington, D.C. That's the environment has certainly changed now. Earmarks are banned, at least temporarily. So as a freshman congressperson, do you plan to follow that tradition? Or do you even agree that there should be earmarks and the ban on earmarks should be lifted? David, I think he's got to go. He's my dance partner, and then the judge.
The power to appropriate is an Article I authority of the Constitution. It sits with the Congress. The earmark story became a story because of abuse. But if you look at the history of the struggle of power between the executive branch and the legislative branch, the executive branch is always trying to wrestle away power. The legislative branch is always trying to bring it back. In the case of the legislative branch giving up its authority to earmark, I think it was irresponsible on behalf of the institution because it said to the President of the United States and the executive branch, we're now going to punt appropriations to an Article II authority, and I disagree with that. That being said, it was rife with abuse. We saw that. We know it. The stories are real. I can tell you, and General Bircher made a comment, that this is a job interview. Right? We are asking the voters of this district to consider our qualifications. And this is an important one for this race, because we are replacing the most senior Republican in the House of Representatives with the most junior member of the entire House. So what we have known of Mr. Young and his ability to stabilize the economy here through federal funding is going to be a significant challenge. But what Mr. Young has shown us is that you can provide for the men and women in uniform, you can provide them with the technology and the tools they need to take our fight to our enemy, while at the same time investing in jobs and the skilled and unskilled workforce here in Pinellas County. There is a way to do that even as a junior member of Congress, and here's why. If you take just the Department of Defense, you know the defense industry here, right down the road at Lockheed Martin, they're working on canopies for fighters. Down the road at the Star Center, they're working on radars that are going on board ships to reduce man hours and maintenance downtime. All that is happening because of programs of records within the already existing Department of Defense budget. At any given time, there are 3 years of budget process going on within the Pentagon. Those are not earmarks. That's the normal budget process. Those are programs of records that are providing for technologies, programs, platforms, and weapons that the Department of Defense is going to procure. Understanding the technical side of how that budget process works, the ability to work today, not just on this year's fiscal year budget, but on the planning of the out-year budgets, both in the Department of Defense and every other agency. That is a qualification that should be considered for those of us that are going through this job interview process. My opportunity to work with Congressman Young, I believe, was providence. I could not have scripted it coming out of college. Frankly, I joked it. When I got to Washington, I thought, well, who wants to work for this old congressman who doesn't get the conservative revolution that's just gone on in 1994? At the end of the day, though, I didn't realize the blessing I would have to learn from one of the greatest statesmen and legislators in the history of the United States Congress. I had the opportunity to do that. And with that, I believe I'm bringing these qualifications to solving exactly the question that you just asked.
I have to admire Mr. Jolly's answer. His knowledge is good with programmer records and how it works. And I want to do the best I can in that area if I get the opportunity. Within the enumerated powers, I think of all the things that Congressman Young did for us, I think that stands out for me as the highest bar, the goal that I would set to try and maintain what he has done, partly because that cannot be a state function. That has to be a federal function. So I go there with all the zealousness of belief that it is the right thing to do. And part of that right thing to do reflects on some of the things we talked about here. It's dismissive of the Constitution, but I think what Congressman Young did allows us, and I would push back, that there's a reason the framers said maintain a Navy. After Clause 12 was raise and support armies, any appropriation limited to 2 years, so you could decide that you didn't want to appropriate that money. They just finished an 8-year war, but the very next clause says maintain a Navy. Well, inside that Navy is a little army. It's called the Marine Corps. That is the force that we should be sending in these places. It does not offend the Constitution. Prior to where we have gotten now, no, Robert E. Lee had to take the United States Marines to Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, 90 miles away to put down a rebellion. Why? It offended the Constitution to take soldiers. That's the kind of thing I think if we get back to many of our answers, when I joined the Marine Corps, the joke was, join the Marine Corps, intervene in the country of your choice. That's...
General, but do you, I'm sorry, just to be clear, do you support the current earmark ban, or would you see that lifted, would you support seeing that lifted if you were elected to Congress?
I've got to answer questions here. But I am telling you, I would need the totality of the information to know that I don't know, but that's kind of a sleazy political answer. The truth is, we've got to limit what I said earlier in this thing. Unsustainable $17 trillion debt. If that meant the earmarks, I'd have to be open to looking at the earmarks, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, next question for Mr. Bircher. Under the U.S. Constitution, individual Americans are entitled to judicial due process, a jury, and other protections from a government that would prosecute or penalize them unilaterally. Now, the U.S. has killed American citizens on foreign soil using drones without any trial. al-Awlaki and his son. Americans can be imprisoned under the NDAA indefinitely without a trial. So the question for you is, do you think it's appropriate for a president to unilaterally imprison or execute an American citizen based solely on his word that they are a danger or they should die?
Okay, well, Doctor, thanks for throwing me that softball. To me, it's a softball, or no, it's a beach ball that I want to hit. Everybody that takes the oath to that Constitution, it is not discretionary that you can substitute your own values for. That is impermissible. The writ of habeas corpus, I mean, that's ancient. That comes from the Magna Carta. If we're going to talk about arbitrary imprisonment of people, then it just cannot be allowed. What is in our Constitution is a thing called no bills of attainder. I didn't know what that was. I never read the Constitution until I was pretty old. And that means, in Old England, the king could say, Doctor, you're an outlaw and you should be shot on sight. And that would be a bill. That was the end of the process. If you notice in our Constitution, it says no. Every one of the terrorists that our federal government has prosecuted under arraignment and first appearance and trial and appeal, they're all in federal prison right now. I'm going to point to that process as being better than to wake up one morning and say, send the drones. And here's why. If history is a teacher, your own government is always a far greater threat to you than any foreign government will ever be. Every pogrom, every Holocaust, every abuse in history, if we talk about Mao or Stalin or Pol Pot or Hitler, it's always a government against its own people. I think we have to include our Indian Relocation Acts of the 1830s, the Trail of Tears. We need to look at our own household as well. Whenever any man, and what is the rule of law? To bind down in chains the discretion of the arbitrary and capricious decisions, which I can't imagine anything more arbitrary and capricious than to wake up one day with imperfect knowledge and say, so-and-so has to die. That is so far off the scale for me, I can't believe this country's even allowing that.
I'm not going to repeat all the preamble, but do you think it's appropriate, Mr. Jolly, for a president to unilaterally imprison or execute an American citizen based solely on his word that they are a danger and they should die?
No.
Can you elaborate?
Maybe two, or can we move on? No, I'm joking, right. So the answer is no, and importantly, because I appreciate the caveats you put in there. Unilaterally and based on his knowledge and his word. Absolutely not. There has to be some form of due process. In the cases you're talking about, and I know the families, I believe, have either filed suit or announced that they intend to file suit, but the issue that a president has to face at some point, and I hope none of us ever have to face this, is in making that decision, they have to determine, is that individual an immediate threat to the United States of America or its people? And whether or not there's a possibility of detaining that person. Now here's the important part of your question. I don't think the President of the United States has the ability to unilaterally make that decision. There has to be a form of due process. We have a Constitution for a reason. Your question about drones, and I like to talk, I don't like to talk about drones, but when we talk about drones, I like to address drones as simply being a tool or a mechanism of conflict. Right? Drones by themselves, fortunately, can be used to save American lives because it keeps pilots out of harm's way. Drones can be used by keeping our men and women in uniform safer because they don't have to go immediately into the conflict. Drones by themselves are simply an instrument or a tool of war. The question is who is ordering that drone and based on what information. And so based on the question you'd ask, that's the answer.
Do you think it's enough due process all in the executive branch, or are the courts required? Should evidence...
No, I think due process is a responsibility of the courts at some level.
Thank you.
This is getting good. I want to ask a real quick question, and then I'm going to ask my question, which is kind of a follow-up on something you said, General, which I appreciate your passion. Off topic, do you support fully funding for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter project? David Jolly? Yes. And General Bircher?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to follow up with something today. The New York Times, that moderate newspaper, wrote a very controversial editorial saying that the president should grant clemency to Edward Snowden in exchange for him coming back to the United States and him turning over the remainder of the data and information that he holds rather than him stay in Moscow or travel to Brazil and continue to release information to The Guardian and other WikiLeaks and other media outlets. So, David Jolly, do you think that Edward Snowden should be given clemency, or do you think he should be prosecuted as a traitor?
I believe Edward Snowden committed treason and does not deserve an ounce of leniency.
I held a TSSCI clearance. I believe that that the lawyer in me is a process guy. I want to see what's out there. I bring this up because I can tell you beyond doubt we're missing chapters in this, and that's probably the way it should be. But I believe that before I could make the decision, I would want to know as much as I could the totality of the evidence and go through that process of deciding, and then weigh it against the best decision for policy.
You only get one of those answers per night to the question. I'm going to press one time.
No, fair enough.
If you had to choose right now, and I understand it's A or B, and that's not how the world works. If you were President Obama, would you entertain the idea of clemency, or would you continue down the path of prosecution for treason?
I would entertain the idea of clemency because of the national interest.
Thank you. Very good.
going to do an easy question on Obamacare. Obamacare has increased the cost of insurance in many ways, including through market reforms like guaranteed issues to insurance to any party, community rating to force younger and healthier people to pay for costs of older and sicker patients. Now, if you could repeal Obamacare or make substantial change to it, can you name at least one insurance market reform you would advocate to make insurance more affordable for Americans? One market reform.
Yes, Doctor. Market reform brings me right back to the free market. I think it's better than government bureaucracy. I cannot find an instance where a government bureaucracy was better than the free market. If I may, Obamacare, there's really no health care in it. It's another government insurance program. And for the people of Pinellas County, do we remember the government flood insurance program and how that worked out for us? So nothing inspires me that this isn't going to bring anything but bureaucracy, inefficiency, regulation, and debt, same as the flood insurance.
But tell me what you would do to reform the health insurance marketplace to make insurance more affordable for Americans.
I would bring it to the free market and the venue where the Constitution says it's required, right here in the state of Florida, and we'd figure it out.
So we have a lot of things in the free market that exist, and we have a lot of time left in the question. So, can you tell me what sorts of things?
Here's one thing. I would find a spine and brain surgeon, and I'd say, help me understand why Dr. Benjamin Carson believes this is the way to go. Because I'm not a doctor. I want to do what's best. So I would, instead of a government bureaucrat telling me, I would go to the medical professionals and say, what's the way ahead? How can we deliver what we want to for our community?
All right, thank you. Mr. Jolly?
I'm glad you asked the Obamacare question, and with all due respect to Kathleen, I wish she was here this evening to discuss her position on Obamacare. That is not intended to be a criticism of Kathleen. I do wish she was here so we could have a full conversation on Obamacare. Folks, I have said from day one that I think Obamacare should go. It should be repealed immediately, no ifs, ands, the individual mandate is unconstitutional. I think as people begin to start realizing that they now live in a world in which their government is requiring them to purchase medical insurance, they're going to realize that this is not the government of the United States that we wish it was. I can tell you right here on this stage that I am for immediate repeal. I can't speak for Mark, but Mark, if you'd like to comment on that.
I thought I did. I'm for the repeal. I think it's unconstitutional. I just think it's bad business.
Okay. So let's talk about how we replace it with free market reforms. I think there have been some excellent commentary out there about how we create a statutory framework that actually instills some free market reforms that allow affordable health insurance. Look at life insurance, how that currently is handled. There's no interference necessarily, unless you want it, with employer subsidies. You can buy free market health insurance. The younger you buy it, the cheaper it is, because it's based on an actuarial table that assumes if you're going to keep that life insurance for the next 30 years, the private insurance company and the free market can price it at an affordable rate for a young person to be sure that with certainty they have that insurance for the next 20 years or 30 years or whatever the term is that they are purchasing. I think we can create a statutory framework by allowing portability across state lines, by eliminating the involvement of the employer as appropriate in a private health insurance plan. To the extent that we can create a statutory framework that allows insurance companies to offer that product on the free market, we will begin to address healthcare costs for everybody, starting with the young.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to ask each one of you a different political question. I'd like to start actually with Dr. Bircher, with General Bircher on this one. I'm going to read a brief sentence from Adam Smith's profile of you in yesterday's Tampa Bay Times, another moderate newspaper.
You're referring to these things as newspapers. They're propaganda arms of the
If life were a Frank Capra movie, no doubt Mark Bircher would be on his way to Congress to succeed the late C.W. Bill Young. He goes on to say, the 6-year-old general is accomplished, passionate and idealistic, is also breathtakingly naive about politics. I was speaking to a young Republican in the back of the room, and we were talking about the difficulty that generals, in particular, from Wesley Clark to the gentleman that ran in Hillsborough, the difficulty generals have making the transition to politics, with saving for General Eisenhower. Why is it so difficult for a man as accomplished as you to make that transition to politics, where you should be on your way to Congress, but we find yourself right now in third place temporarily in the polls? What is so difficult about the transition from military life to politics? Other than having to deal with loudmouth bloggers. So.
I'm not sure I believe the premise that it is difficult. I think in my case, time was a factor. That when I went in, time is always a factor in everything, especially military operations. So, I think the people usually get it right. Grant was a president that had a military background. I think Van Buren, there were several, so I'm just not sure that I can believe that there's difficulty in the transition. In my case, I'm third because that's what the polls are showing, and I can't really extrapolate that to anybody else. If I'm third, it's because I need to do better and work harder and get further. But I'm just not sure why I'm having difficulty saying because you're in the military it's hard to make the transition. I just don't believe that.
Okay. And Mr. Jolly, it's funny because to see you now as the front runner, and I've known you for a very long time, and it's probably surprising to both of us right now that you are the front runner to the GOP nomination, no matter how accomplished you are in the private sector. Two questions then. Number one, is there anything that you've lobbied for that you regret lobbying for at the time? Something that if you had to do all over, you may have not taken that client, or maybe doesn't fit necessarily in the role of a Republican congressman. And then secondly, let's say you do wake up on January 15th and you are the Republican nominee. You're going to be up against the DNC juggernaut. Alex Sink raised $1.1 million. She has 10 times what you have right now. How do you intend to defeat her in a compressed calendar?
Let's take the first question, then you can remind me of the second one. And I would also say to the general, so Adam Smith referred to you as breathtakingly naive. When he wrote about me and my respect for our local senior state senator, he called me breathtakingly stupid. So, so take comfort in only being naive, I suppose. Some of you have heard me, a number of folks who have supported our campaign are out at a lot of events. You've heard me say when we got into this race, we were polling below the margin of error. It was Peter that shared that with me. I think we were 1.7%, and the margin of error was about 4.5%. Listen, I think, and we get to see it in this race, because this is a local one-county, home county, community-type district race. This race is about the people and the voters of this district. And at the end of the day, this race is not about the endorsement of one person or another just because they have the honorable in front of their name or because they've already been elected. This race is about the voters coming forward and choosing who they believe they want to represent them. And they have an opportunity to consider the remarkable qualifications of Mark. They have the opportunity to consider the qualifications of the other candidates in the race as well. The House of Representatives is a unique construct in the entire Constitution. It is the only body, it is the only office to be a member of Congress that you must be elected by the people in your community. You can be President of the United States without ever having been elected. You can be Vice President without having been elected. You can be a Supreme Court Justice. You can be a United States Senator. You can be a cabinet official. You cannot serve in the people's house without the people electing you to serve. That's what's special, frankly, about this primary. And so let's talk about the second issue, which is the DCCC. Curtis Kruger with the Tampa Bay Times, a reporter who I actually have remarkable respect for, asked me, were you surprised that Alex Sink raised $1 million? And I said, absolutely not. I was surprised she didn't raise $2 million. Because this race has always been about how much money the National Democrats and the DCCC and Debbie Wasserman Schultz can pump into Pinellas County to make sure she takes this seat from Pinellas County. We're not going to let that happen. At the end of the day, we are going to win this race because Alex Sink and the National Democratic Party are wrong on the issues and they do not reflect the values of the people here in Pinellas County. Sink can represent Pinellas County. But I'm telling you this, we can spend $1, and as long as people understand our message and where we stand on issues, we are going to beat Alex Sink on substance and on issues. We're going to do that on March 11th.
My last question, and before I end with that, I just ask folks here to go check out the Sunbeam Times. That's a shameless plug. Subscribe to sunbeamtimes.com. Mr. Bircher, the current national debt is $17 trillion. In addition, there's a $120 trillion unfunded liability for Medicare, Social Security, and other programs that may cripple America economically. Now, if you had no choice, but that you had to balance the budget within 5 years, I want you to name some specific spending cuts you would make to help balance that federal budget within 5 years, and be very specific.
It's the key question, I think, if we're going to really change our government. The projections exceed the wealth of the world. If that doesn't put us on notice that we've got a financial problem coming, nothing else will. My major tactic would be to return to the venue the state said, all those functions that do not require uniformity. Because in theory, that's the only thing the federal government is going to do. So we would ask our questions. Let's go into what used to be 4 cabinet level positions that is now 15, plus 6 more agencies of equivalent cabinet level. Can we do education in the state of Florida? Are we equipped to do education?
Yes.
Can we decide health care?
Yes.
And in the back, I would like my father-in-law, Dr. Angelo Spoto, to please stand up. Because he's retired, but he still volunteers 2 days a week. So government doesn't have to be the answer to everything. That we actually can figure it out on our own. So we would just go through every one of those. And we would ask ourselves, where's the venue? Because I think for every dollar we send to Washington to serve a purpose here, education, healthcare, all the rest of us, we get something back that looks smaller than $1. We may not even get our dollar back. If we send it to Tallahassee, if we decide there needs to be a state level, it'll be a bigger dollar. So that's what I would do. I would go through every one of those and say, can we do it here? And return each one of those specific items back to where it belongs.
Mr. Jolly?
So I'm glad you recognize the totality of the long-term out-year debt of our entitlement program, because that's one of the things that is currently wrong with Washington. I've said from the beginning, look, we know what is crippling our long-term budget forecast is entitlements. It is. You can look at the amount of entitlement spending as a share of our federal budget around 1960, and it was roughly 38 to 40%. Today, if you take Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt, that consumes, I want to say, about 65% of our federal budget. Don't PolitiFact me on that, but generalities. Discretionary budget is not where we're going to balance the budget, because we have allowed our entitlement programs to grow so far that we have to address entitlement spending before we can balance the budget. Can we do that in 5 years? David, I don't know that we can balance the budget through cuts in 5 years. We balance the budget through economic growth that increases revenue. Economic growth is the only way we can get to a balanced budget in 5 years, because Washington has so outspent its means. To retract that quickly simply with cuts, I think, would have a crippling effect on our economy. I can tell you this, it's time, it is far past time, that we recognize the promises that we have made to beneficiaries of our entitlement programs. We say we have made these promises as a government. Listen, I'm a fiscal conservative. Part of being a fiscal conservative is taking responsibility. We have to take responsibility for the promises our government has made to individuals. It is not the individual's fault that they have relied on Washington. So now is the time that we ask Washington to take responsibility and take ownership of the promises it's made. You used the right number. The right number is not $20 trillion. The number is, if you take the entire out-year obligation of our entitlement programs, you probably would approach $100 trillion, depending on how you score that. We need to recognize that as debt, put it on our balance sheet, own that debt, set about paying that off, and then turn around and say, for future generations, we have entitlement programs that are unsustainable. And so we do need to address what the future of entitlement programs will be. But we don't do that by changing the rules of the game on beneficiaries that have paid into the system and have been made promises by Washington. We have to continue to protect them.
Thank you.
this with a little lightning round, one answer, and we'll be out of here. Several questions. We'll go David, then General, and then David. Lift the Cuban embargo. Yes, no.
I don't think we can outright lift it.
General.
Yes.
Trey Riddell, resign or stay? Should Congressman Trey Riddell resign or run for re-election?
Run for re-election.
Resign.
Would you have voted for the Ryan Murray budget that just was passed in at the end of the year? Would you? This is to you, David. Your first up. Would you?
No.
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 Favorite political TV show or movie?
7 days in May.
Can you count Forrest Gump because there's 3 presidents and a king in it?
Last question. I'm going to start with David. Bircher or Peters?
We are going to nominate a Republican that beats Alex Sink, and I'm going to support either one of them.
General. Jolly or Peters?
The people will decide, and I will support.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, panelists, for your questions. Peter was actually a little off. There are some more questions. It's not over. We did have a couple questions submitted from our members, questions that pertain to young adults, which comprise our group members. First question, General Bircher, you will begin. The cost of education has grown unreasonably high. Student loans are ballooning out of control. What can be done to mitigate the financial time bomb of tens of billions of unpaid debt, and doing this while keeping education both accessible and affordable?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that question by pointing to the 2 parts of our society that are going up 10 to 15% a year as opposed to the inflation of 1 to 2. That's education and healthcare. Why is that? Because the government is saying, we'll put money into it. The free market says, where's the market? So I think the reason our costs are so high in those areas is in part because the federal government has intruded by leaving out the part that they're either taxing us or worse, writing debt to supposedly give us things. So both of those, I believe the federal government's involvement is the reason both of those entities are too high.
Look, I think the answer to higher education should rest at the state level. We have a great state university system here in Florida. The closer we can get decision making to the state university system, the better we are going to be, the better product we are going to offer students. I think it is always good public policy to encourage higher education. I think that's what the federal government has tried to do with this loan subsidy program. At the same time, we know as economists that any time a product is subsidized, it distorts the market, and that's what we've seen. I think what has created the real crux here, what we are seeing, is that the universities are not held accountable for the product that they are graduating their students with. And when the students leave the university, they are left with the debt that they owe to a third party, not to the university. If the university had to suffer the consequences of the long-term debt that their students hold, we would have better transparency in pricing the product that those students leave college with.
Last question. Increasing flood insurance costs serves as a barrier of entry to many young professionals who seek to be first-time homeowners. What is your plan, starting with Mr. Jolly, to solve the flood insurance crisis?
So the first thing we do, only because it's the most attainable, is we delay the Bigger Waters Act, but at the same time, that's not the answer. A bad law today is a bad law 4 years from now. So simply delaying Bigger Waters for 4 years isn't going to solve the problem. Some of you may have seen that I proposed, at least in concept, a national natural disaster insurance program that better aggregates the risk from the west coast to the northwest, to the northeast, to the plains, to the flood states, to the southeast, and says, let's look at all natural disasters. Because at the end of the day, if a homeowner doesn't have insurance, or a region like New Jersey is underinsured by some have said 40%, the federal government has to step in with disaster assistance and pay it anyway. Let's add stability to the secondary insurance market. And then let's recognize that by doing that and by aggregating the risk, and honestly, by holding Washington more accountable, we can better stabilize the market and you'll see prices of flood insurance drop here. We know why flood insurance in Florida went up. It's because Washington looked at who's currently paying. The most customers were in the southeast because those were the most that were in compliance. Simply others in the northeast were out of compliance. They looked at those that were most in compliance and said those are the people paying, so we're going to double, triple, and quadruple their premiums. It's ridiculous that somebody that has a $100,000 home might have a $20,000 flood insurance policy. An economist would say that that home's going to be destroyed every 5 years. That's Washington math. That's not Pinellas County math. Let's do away with bigger waters. Let's replace it with a national policy that better aggregates and associates the risk with different communities across the country.
Only Washington could come up with a plan that goes along and the legacy is $25 billion in debt and going to a homeowner and saying your rate went from $1,700 to $7,000. That's just, only a government could come up with that. I disagree. I do not think the federal government has a role in this except for the Corps of Engineers to support the states in doing the geodetic survey so we know actually where the flood is. The solution is at the local level where the interest is greatest, like in my neighborhood where the homes are, where I'm in it myself. I believe the community answer and the state answer will always be better and more efficient because I have an interest in a house in my neighborhood not being abandoned because the homeowner couldn't sell it or could not afford to insure it. I believe the community answer is always superior to the central government answer, and it's really a subset of why big government answers to me are no better than bigger government answers. The answer is in our community. We can figure this out. It's not insurmountable.
Both the candidates and the panelists for taking the time to join us here. Let's give them all a round of applause. On the last program, Pinellas County Republicans, again, thank you all for coming. If you wish to support Republican organizations, please consider the PCYRs as we do drive a contribution